Previously, he's worked at high-growth startups such as JustWorks and Spotify. Spotify, I wouldn't even say a startup at this point. That's a big company. Yeah, it probably was at one point. And he has his BA from Harvard, another very smart guy. Also, your name sounds like you should be famous, so that's pretty cool too. Charlton Lamb, welcome.
Step one, I guess. I don't need that?
Yeah.
This is mine? Thank you. Hi, guys. What's up? This is it's tough. This room is so wide. I have to do a lot of doing. Okay, anyway, hi. I think my talk is going to be slightly different than everyone else's, and I hope that at like the second half of the second day of this, that's like kind of welcome, which is unlike all the other super talented people, like, excuse me, I'm not going to be talking like really concretely about like really specific tools that you can use to solve the challenges that we face every day. But I want to talk a little bit more from like a career perspective around like as a product marketer, how you can be thinking about how to design and grow into your career. And hopefully that's useful to some of you. So I know I get a lot of contact like emails and LinkedIn messages from people that are new into the product marketing field or are looking to get into the product marketing field. There's actually people in this room that I know I had those conversations with. And I think I'm speaking to those people right now who have maybe just recently, they've become a product marketer and now they want to think about like, what are the paths that are available to me? How should I be thinking about the kinds of work that I'm doing, the kinds of experience that I'm getting in order to set myself best up for whatever it is that next step is, even if it's years away. Okay, there's literally one gigantic button on this, and it took me a while to find it. So I am going to first take a little bit about myself so you can understand why I at all feel qualified to speak on this topic. I'm going to speak about why I think product marketers are like perfectly set up to take on like larger leadership roles within like a marketing organization. Then I'll talk through some of the experiences that I've had and think about what are some of the ways that you can be interacting with your peers now that's going to set you up to kind of be an effective leader in the future. And then finally, I'll talk about what I think has been, for me at least, like the biggest challenge in kind of stepping outside of just the product marketing box and thinking a little bit more broadly around how marketing impacts the rest of the organization. Sorry, I just really love this photo, so I had to get it out there. And my mom likes it too. So I won't go too deep into this background because my friend here just so helpfully read it out. But right now I'm the head of marketing at a startup called STEM. We're a music and fintech platform. We help independent artists and labels actually understand their money and get paid in the music industry. If you know truly anything about the music industry, you understand that it's like the Byzantine Empire trying to actually like get your money and even find out how much money you're supposed to be getting. So it's a really, really great place to be. And before that, I think all these got like sort of like read out. I've had like product marketing like IC and like director roles at places like Spotify, Community, JustWorks, and then way back in the day at Cisco Meraki, also when they were a startup, although no longer. Okay, cool. So today, outside of just like product marketing, even though I still think of myself as a product marketer at heart, like I'm responsible for all of our marketing comms functions. And at STEM right now, that pretty much just breaks down to product, brand, PR, and demand generation. And I think that the main point I want to make here is like not that like I'm so cool and like that's why I like have like created these things, but it's not that. Ooh. Again, one button. It's not that I'm so special, it's because I think like product marketers are. I think like that has been like the best kind of education that's kind of like prepared me to kind of look at the world in this way. And so I think something that I've found is that leadership it's a bit like returning to being a generalist in marketing. Instead of having this like really clearly defined set of skills and the kinds of processes that we've been talking about over the past couple of days, now you sort of have to be everywhere, kind of like almost like a busybody in everyone's business and kind of like figure out how to do a lot with like a little bit of knowledge about a lot of things. So you spend a lot less time actually doing work and a lot more time discussing work, discussing how you want work to be done, how work is going, how work has been done, how everyone else thinks the work went, becomes suddenly like your day-to-day, which can be a big shift if you're used to actually like getting your hands dirty and like doing things, and it's something to kind of like prepare for. But I think, luckily, as product marketers, we've all spent like years honing a skill set that I think makes us like really great at that act of kind of like discussing work and making that a really valuable practice. And I'm going to talk about all four of these things like in a little bit more detail in a minute, but we sit at the nexus. I think everyone kind of recognizes like that cross-functional viewpoint that we have in the business almost always. We write the narrative. We're the ones that, in my experience, have often the best understanding of the metrics. And my favorite one, we actually enable decisions. So sitting at the nexus, as product marketers, this one, this cannot be a surprise to anyone sitting here. Like, we're the ones that are sitting at these cross-functional efforts. We have to balance the needs, the different goals, the personalities, the egos of like completely disparate parts of the business, and do that on usually to like a pretty strict timeline that has like real revenue impact. And that kind of balancing act is what's going to enable you to kind of like speak a little bit more broadly to those departments later in life. The next is writing the narrative. I think I found like one of like the greatest tools in the product marketing toolbox is writing that compelling story that really grounds your own work in like a really clear strategy. But what it also does is enables other people to asynchronously be rowing in the same direction, have a really clear idea about like what the actual goals are and what they should be trying to accomplish. Next is understanding the metrics. I think as opposed to at least the sort of common understanding of like different marketing orgs, I think compared to other marketing teams, product marketing, we're really looking way past vanity metrics. Like, we are looking for the numbers that are actually describing behavior, that actually are going to tell us what's actually driving adoption, what's driving retention, what's like decreasing churn. Like, we're not as concerned with or preoccupied with just like raw eyeballs that we're getting on like a particular campaign or creative, especially those of us in like a B2B space. And finally, as I said, like my favorite is about like enabling decisions. Something that I've noticed that often is like the most valuable thing that you can bring, especially to like a large project, isn't actually the action, isn't actually like making a decision. It's actually listening to a whole lot of different opinions, a whole lot of, maybe it's qualitative information, maybe it's quantitative data, and distilling that into a structured set of options that's going to enable either leadership or just a team or someone else to be able to actually make that decision. Because that structure is what's going to help you 6 months down the line when you find out that that was the wrong decision, like, well, then what do we do next, or why? Or when you find out it was the exact right decision, and now you want to know, how do we pour gasoline on that fire? What actually is driving the success that we had? And that structured set is going to be much more valuable than making the decision. Okay, so next I want to talk about, beyond just like skills, I think something that we all know that leadership is about actually like people and how to work with people. And so I'm going to talk through like some examples from my past and thinking about like how you might work on developing the kind of people skills and like relationships like now early on when you're working with your peers that's going to enable you to actually sort of like lead those functions or have an opinion about how those functions should work. Yeah, how might we do that? And I think, okay, so the next session after this is a Spotify one. It's actually going to be given by my former manager, hey Sam. And so I feel bad because I'm about to run through some like classic Spotify examples. So you're going to have to think of some new case studies so you don't bore these people half an hour from now. So the three things that I want to kind of focus on is defining and measuring goals, giving creative feedback, and driving strategy through influence. Now this is, I was like writing the slide and I was like, this is like sort of just like the job, right? Like this is like, none of these things are like, wow, I've never thought about giving good feedback before. But I want us to think about it in terms of like, there's the act of like giving feedback because you need something done and you needed it done yesterday, and now I need you to do this like so fast. And then how can you then take that experience and look back and work with that designer or that animator or whoever and say like, okay, what is it that I said that actually got you to the right answer actually in the end? Like how could I have worked better with you on this? Because I think we've all been in situations where the feedback is not hitting the way it needs to. So in terms of defining and measuring goals, here my sort of example is working with, this is where you want to kind of really partner with your demand gen team, right? Like they're really the ones who are thinking day in, day out about like the very sort of quantitative understanding about the journey that your customers are taking. How can you work with them to really be crystal clear about the right way to kind of set up goals and what measurement for a successful project is going to look like. So this example, Marquee, was a real labor of love at Spotify. We launched a brand new native ad format that had a lot of unique properties and like a truly unorthodox sales process because this was a new music announcement tool. So like its value pretty much arose and eroded like all within like the first week that an album came out. Like our sort of approach to inventory, our approach to customers that were in market for buying was like completely different than any other digital ad product I had worked on because it was so finite. And you're in a process where in music, like someone could decide the night before that all of a sudden the album isn't coming out or it is coming out. So there was just like a lot of bizarre things going on in the data in terms of who was eligible to be buying this, like who did we miss? Are we doing a good job of actually covering like different kinds of like releases? There were weeks in which it turns out we could have been doing a great job, or it turns out we could have been doing a bad job. And it was just like very hard to look at the data to understand that because it wasn't static. And so I started that way and like looking as like as one does, as like just like trying to get a hold of the data myself and sort of like crunching through and like seeing what are the patterns, and I was going to come up with like some like exact right answer. But like the actual thing to do was actually to go back to what product marketing was actually good at and actually really describing to my demand gen partners, well, this is the actual behavior that we're talking about. There is some population of artists who are ready to release an album, and some population of them have enough money to pay for this ad unit. And being able to describe it in like more of those terms and let them focus on like, okay, well, what are the numbers that are going to like point to that? What are the metrics that are going to tell us what that goal is? Actually got us like there in a lot faster. Instead of trying to come up with the answer, really retreating into being like, what I can bring to this is actually a really good understanding of what people are actually trying to do, and then we can sort of get access to the right data sets to map that. The next is on giving creative feedback. I think in a lot of ways, I think as consumers, hopefully we've all kind of like seen the amazing creative that Spotify puts out. I think one of the best things I learned there was about how to work with like a really, really creative and exciting like brand team. And our challenge here was trying to create a white paper content, which is just like part of the really bread and butter B2B product marketing sort of like toolkit. But our customer set is like record label execs who like barely read an email, let alone a white paper that has like graphs or numbers or like charts in it. However, when you're selling like ads and like ad units, you kind of need people to believe in the metrics in order to actually think your unit is valuable, that it has something to do. So our challenge was, how can we sort of approach that concept of a white paper and make it feel sexy and exciting and something that like, I hate to use the word, but like hip, that like a regular would actually want to read. And what is funny about that whole description I just gave, like that's not a creative brief. Like you can't just like go to your designers and say like, give me numbers but make them sexy. Or you can do that, and I did do that, and it was bad. And so what we learned, it was like through like a lot of trial and error, it was like, okay, like when you say sexy, Charleston, what do you actually mean? And we started from like looking at like the typical Spotify branding. It's really bright colors. It's really like in your face. It's really exciting. And we sort of said, okay, well, actually, what we want is to make this a little bit more professional. So what if we went with something that's like more muted and a much more serious kind of like direction? And we started to get towards language that actually was able to help us sort of like move faster towards what I wanted to happen and like what the strategy was and like what is actual design feedback that a designer can actually put their hands on the keyboard and use. And this is something that took forever, and like you get to a point where at some point there's like a launch date that you have to hit for these projects, and at that point you're saying just like whatever you need to say in order to get the thing out. But something I think that is really valuable is then taking the time to go back with your team, and while you're saying thank you for them staying up until midnight to deliver assets to you, just being like clear and saying like, okay, so like I noticed you hated it when I asked for you to make the numbers hip. Like what would have made that more helpful? Would have made that more useful? So that the next time around you can actually like speak to a creative team and actually help them deliver the best work that they can. And then finally is thinking about strategy through influence instead of through like direct control. I think comms is like a really great example here because like it's like the ultimate example of like a resource you can't really control, right? We've all written sort of like comms strategy docs, but like you can't just like make these reporters or analysts or whoever, you can't make them say what you want them to say. So you have to think about what are the levers that you do have in order to try to get the result that you're looking for. This example was a tool we had discovery mode that was like super dramatic at the time when it came out because it touched on a lot of like hot button issues for Spotify in terms of like who gets to recommend, like are we catering to the major labels more so than indies? A lot of things that were like really just like hot button issues for us. And so how we started to control that response was thinking really carefully about who we were talking to, like, and when we were talking to them and what information we gave each person. And breaking it down into well, there are pieces about this like we can control actually. Like this person can't write X kind of story if they don't know Y part of the product. Or this person can't be the first one who comes out because we know exactly how they're going to sort of like criticize. And we want to make sure that they're reacting to something else. And anyway, I just think it's like a really good example of how you can think about where you actually are able to move sort of like pieces. I don't want to sound too like Machiavellian, but where you can't directly just tell someone, here's what I need you to do and expect that to happen. Like how can you kind of create the environment for them to do it? And that leads kind of like directly to what I found has been like the biggest challenge is that like as a product marketer, like your greatest tool in problem solving is yourself. Like we've all been like you're approaching a month towards launch, like we've got dates we've committed to, there's money that we've spent against like certain things. Like at this point, like now I'm a technical writer, now I'm the graphic designer, like now I'm a therapist, like whatever you have to be in order to hit those dates, and like that's just what you become, and it doesn't matter. Like that's just what you're going to deliver, and that's what everyone celebrates you for. That's what's going to get you, like shouted out at all hands. It's going to get you the promotion at the end. It's like doing that stuff. But like as a leader, you can't do that. That's actually just like a bad thing. Like when your team is sort of like struggling with something, it's just like not a good look, and it's not healthy for you to just like suddenly drop down and say, it's fine, just give this to me, I'll do it, I'll fix it. It's gonna like lead to people who think you're annoying, who think you're a micromanager, and it's gonna lead to people who aren't able to do that in the future when you need them to. And so you have to think, this has truly been like the hardest thing, but like thinking from like brute forcing your way through a problem is like no longer in the toolkit. And for some of us, that's like the biggest tool in the toolkit. And so it's more about thinking ahead about how to shift resources, how to coach others into doing things. And what's going to help you in thinking ahead and doing a thing is exactly those skill sets that we talked about in the beginning. So if you're defining your goals and your measurement like ahead of time, you can see these things coming. and you can give people the tools to kind of coach themselves based on what they're seeing in the data. So just to kind of like recap, product marketing, in my opinion, compared to all the other marketing disciplines, I hope maybe they're not in the room, have like traditionally like the skills for leadership. I think now I hope they are in the room, because like I really expect us to like look to our peers for like what they can teach us about their functions, how they work, how we can be better at communicating with them, so that in some future point when we have to be responsible for PR, having never maybe spoken directly to a reporter before, we know actually how that works, what good looks like. And then finally, you have to take that old adage, turn it right off in your head. If you want something done right, you actually can't do it yourself. And you have to learn how to be comfortable with that. And that's kind of that. That's really all I kind of really had. The last plug, I guess I'll end on, I am hiring. Do email me. Find me on LinkedIn, whatever. But I'll leave it here.
We got some questions. You got to stay up. You got to stay up. Oh, there you go. So, making numbers sexy. It's hard.
Tough. It's a tough job.
Tough one. It's a tough job. All right. What other career paths are available to PMMs who don't want to people manage?
Totally. I think that's a really, really often, like, depending on the kind of org you're in, they can kind of like make it hard to feel good about that path. But I mean, I think like always for me, it's always thinking about, can you just be a better product marketer? Can you be working on a more complicated product? Can you be working on a bigger portfolio of products? Can you grow your product into a bigger thing? Like if you're working, I think, in ads, like I often find that like as a product like grows, you have like greater needs for different sort of like sub-functions of those products. Like you have, all of a sudden you have a greater need for forecasting, a greater need for sales processes, and just like your scope and your portfolio kind of can just grow. I also think, I lost where the question is, but I also think like I've also seen PMMs like go into roles that are a little bit more specialized in working with like special projects and with sort of like new product development. And those kinds of things.
Yes, some companies do a really good job of leaving ads for ICs. Like when I was at Amazon, there was very senior people that were just ICs, and they just didn't want to manage people.
Totally.
So, and I think it's an org structure thing. All right, can a PMM become a CMO? Oh, there it is, still is there. Can a PMM become a CMO without taking roles they don't want to? Demand gen, growth marketing, ops, etc.
Without doing those roles? I think yes. Without, being responsible for them, I think no. I think I'm just going to answer this with like, that's the importance of hiring people that you trust to do those things. The better you're able at finding people that can do those things, the less you have to think about them.
And I think you were mentioning just product marketing in itself is in a position where we do touch all of those things.
Totally.
With a central piece there. All right, what types of roles do you think product marketing prepares you for outside of the marketing org?
That's a good one. I think I spoke about like some of them just before. I think one I see like a lot more commonly is like this sort of like new product development or like new markets development. I think there is that sort of skill of taking a business or a part of the business from 0 to 1. I think is something that product marketers are really kind of like well suited for. And that can take a number of different forms in an org. I've also seen PMMs, depending on the nature of the organization, take on things like strategy or like crisis response, or things like, or depending on how the business structure, like a GM role as well. That sort of like steps even outside the roles I was talking about, but also to sales and other kinds of customer-facing interactions.
Yep. At what moment did you know you were ready to move from IC to head of marketing? I'm assuming there was a step in between IC and head of marketing. But
there was, yeah. And I honestly, the moment where I felt ready is like yet to come. I'll check in with you guys at the San Francisco session. I don't know. I think what really I think it's not, it was, for me, it was less so much about like the role and more about the kind of company I wanted to be at and the kinds of challenges I wanted to work on. So like just going into back into like a kind of like smaller startup environment, it kind of just like necessitated like taking on like a little bit more work in like sort of like a smaller lane. But that, you know, has its kind of like pros and cons compared to what you were doing before as well.
Do you think PMM should be in marketing or product? I'm guessing
What?
I know the answer to this.
A good question. I have dealt with this question so many times in so many ways. I've worked in marketing, I've worked in product, I've worked for someone who was like somehow chief marketing and product officer. Ultimately, I come down on the side of marketing but that's maybe just me because I do think that I'm like a marketer at heart. But I always think most about like what value am I bringing into the room, like when I am a PMM. And as a PMM who is like, I really, really like to be there with product and like working the product dev cycles from like the very early on. I think part of the value that I bring in there is having this knowledge of, well, this is what our actual sort of brand total strategy is. This is how we've defined who our customer is and how we're speaking to them. And now I can bring that to this conversation about this feature or that feature being like more applicable or useful. And I think it's really helpful to be able to kind of bring that into those spaces. I think there are maybe, depending on like what the sort of like strength and sophistication of the marketing team is, it might make sense to sit with product. But if we're just asking for my opinion, marketing.
Great.
They have better swag anyway.
Let's see, where did it go? I'll just go to this one. Is it better to take a lead? Oh, it's just moving around. Is it better to take a leadership role in a small org to start your leadership career, or taking an IC role at a large org to work your way up?
I think that is a tough question. I think that, in my experience, I think that it is easier to be successful in a leadership role at a small org when you've been at a large org before, even if you weren't even in a leadership role there. I think it's like really, really useful when you're somewhere smaller where things are just starting from scratch. It's very, very useful to have in your mind like, oh, I know what good is like sort of supposed to look like. I may have truly no idea how they made that happen or like what was required, but I know that like we're not just kind of like fumbling around in the dark here as to like what this kind of strategy or what this kind of like team could look like. That's my take. But if you're a person that's coming to product marketing because you have like some like really specialized knowledge in an industry, or you have like a different kind of background, in consulting or iBanking or something, like that's where you're kind of like basing your skill set on. I think that could also really work out.
Ideally both, right? I mean, if you somehow master both. All right, last one. What's your best piece of advice to a new product marketer? What's something you wish you knew when you were starting out?
Something I wish I knew when I was starting out. I mean, literally everything. I wish I knew everything. But I think that I wish I knew when I was starting out, like how to ask for the kinds of projects that I wanted to be working on. I think that like I just like, based on my background and coming in, like, you know, you just like very easily fall into this thing of like, I want to be working on like the biggest, the sexiest, like the thing that everyone's talking about in all hands. Like that's the project I want to be on. I want to be working on the project that has the biggest scope or like the most revenue impact. And I wish I knew how to look deeper at what we were doing and understanding like, oh, this project actually is going to require a lot of like creative ideation, or this project is going to require a lot of working with our machine learning or like data team. And like, if I were able to think a little bit better about, I'm actually designing the kinds of skills I want to have, not just the kinds of like prestige that I've like acquired. And I think that would actually have taken me a lot farther, a lot faster. if I thought about it that way instead of in terms of what you think is going to look the best on your kind of year in review.
Awesome. Well, that's it. Thank you so much, Charleston Lamb.
Thanks, guys.